was 12 feet underground, rationing oxygen, when I realized the snowstorm wasn't hiding me anymore. The footsteps had started 3 minutes ago. I knew it was 3 minutes because I'd been counting my breaths. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The way you're supposed to when the air's running thin, and your chest feels like it's wrapped in wet canvas. The math kept me sane. 4 in, 6 out. That's 10 seconds per breath. 18 breaths in 3 minutes. 54 seconds of breathing out of 180 seconds of pure crystallized terror. The footsteps were irregular. Not the steady crunch of someone walking through fresh snow, but a dragging, arrhythmic scrape. Step, pause, drag, pause. Step, like something had forgotten how walking worked, but remembered the general concept. The snow was coming down so hard I could hear it through the ventilation shaft. A constant whisper of white noise that should have been soothing but instead felt like static between radio stations. The kind where you almost hear voices in the emptiness. Then the digging started. Not frantic, not purposeful, just methodical, patient scraping somewhere above my head to the left of the main shaft. Ice crystals began falling from the dugout ceiling, pattering onto my sleeping bag like frozen rain. I watched them accumulate in the beam of my headlamp. Each tiny impact a countdown I didn't want to finish. My hand found the ice axe leaning against the wall. The metal was so cold it burned even through my glove. I didn't lift it, didn't move, because movement means noise, and noise means they know exactly where you are, instead of approximately where you are. And that difference is the difference between breathing and not breathing. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The digging stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the sound, because now I was listening for what comes next. The crack of frozen earth giving way. The collapse of my ceiling, the moment when 12 feet of packed soil and snow stops being a barrier and becomes a grave that works both ways. I'll tell you why the dugout worked. I'll tell you why I barely made it out alive. But first, you need to understand something about being a prepper that most people get wrong. We're not crazy. We're not paranoid. We're just people who've done the math on disaster and decided we'd rather be uncomfortable than dead. I ran those numbers for tornadoes, wildfires, economic collapse. I built spreadsheets for water purification and caloric requirements and ammunition stockpiles. I never ran the numbers on this. No one did. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a doomsday prepper. Not the TV kind with underground bunkers full of freeze-dried beef, stroganoff, and enough ammunition to invade a small country. I'm the practical kind. The kind who lives on 17 acres of Oklahoma red dirt, 3 miles from a town small enough that everyone knows your name and your business, far enough from any city that the problems of the world feel like someone else's problems. The dugout wasn't supposed to be my primary shelter. It was contingency planning. 4th or 5th on my list of if things go bad scenarios. I dug it out over 2 summers, mostly by hand because backhoes leave tracks that show up on satellite imagery. and preppers learn to be private about their preparations. People judge. People ask questions. People show up at your door when the world ends, and you have to choose between your conscience and your survival. The dugout was 12 feet deep, accessed by a slanted tunnel that came up behind my storage shed. Hidden by a false floor I could drop and camouflage in under 3 minutes. It was 8 feet by 12 feet of reinforced earth walls, timber supports, and just enough headroom to stand if you didn't mind ducking. I'd lined it with poly sheeting to keep the moisture out, installed a ventilation shaft that came up 50 yards away, disguised as a busted water pipe, and stocked it with enough supplies for 2 weeks of absolute emergency shelter. 2 weeks. That was my calculation. That's what my spreadsheet said was reasonable for the kind of disasters I was planning for. Tornado levels a house. You need shelter until help arrives, or you can rebuild. Wildfire burns through the area. You wait for the smoke to clear. Some kind of civil unrest, you let it blow over. 2 weeks seemed responsible, practical, not paranoid. I was so fucking wrong. The dugout had a sleeping platform, a mechanical toilet that I'd never actually field tested, 5 gallons of water in rotation, a hand crank radio, LED lanterns with backup batteries, non-perishable food for 14 days, a first aid kit, and an air circulation system I'd designed myself using a small solar panel and a DC fan. The solar panel lived above ground, camouflaged as junk metal. The fan ran 20 minutes every hour, pulling fresh air down the intake shaft and pushing stale air out through a separate exhaust. It worked beautiful. In theory. In summer, in conditions where snow wasn't falling so hard, it covered the solar panel in 3 hours and blocked both ventilation shafts by the end of day 1. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The dugout existed because I believe in preparation. I believe in redundancy. I believe that hope is not a strategy, and luck is just probability that hasn't turned against you yet. My ex-wife used to say I loved my disaster scenarios more than I loved her, and maybe she was right. She left 6 years ago, took half of everything, and left me with the land and the question of what I was really preparing for. Turns out I was preparing for this, just not well enough. It started like everything starts now, with the internet lying to you. November 14th, Thursday. I remember because Thursdays I drove into town for supplies, the weekly routine that kept me connected to civilization just enough to not become the crazy hermit the locals whispered about. I was in the grocery store, pushing a cart with a squeaky wheel, when Marcy Peterson asked if I'd heard about the sickness in Minneapolis. Some kind of flu, she said, scanning my canned goods with the kind of slow deliberation that meant she wanted to talk. They're saying it's spreading fast. Schools closing. Hospitals full. You know how these things go. Probably just another overhyped cold season. I didn't know. I'd stopped watching the news 3 years ago because the anxiety was eating me alive. And you can't prep for everything, so why torture yourself with every potential disaster? But something in Marcy's voice, a forced casualness, made me pay attention. I checked my phone in the parking lot. Reddit was on fire. Twitter was worse. The pattern was familiar. The same kind of viral spread you saw with COVID, but faster. Incomprehensibly faster. Minneapolis on Monday, Chicago by Tuesday. By Thursday morning, confirmed cases in Detroit, Indianapolis, Kansas City, Omaha. The pattern made a shape on the map, a bloom spreading outward, concentric circles of infection that would reach us, rural Oklahoma, middle of nowhere, in days, not weeks. I drove home faster than I should have. Spent the afternoon moving supplies from my house to the dugout. Not evacuating, just redistributing. Preparing for the possibility I might need to go underground. The prepper part of my brain was calm, methodical, running through checklists. The human part was screaming. By Friday, cell service was degrading. Not out, just intermittent. Calls would drop mid-sentence. Texts would arrive hours late or not at all. The internet was still working, but websites were timing out. Streaming services buffering endlessly. The infrastructure was collapsing under the weight of everyone trying to get information at once. The emergency alert started Friday night. That harsh buzzing that makes your teeth ache. The screen lighting up with messages that got progressively more concerning. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. Emergency service suspended until further notice. Do not attempt to travel. Roads closed. Then the alerts just stopped. No explanation. No further instructions. Just silence where panic used to be. I tried calling my brother in Tulsa. The call wouldn't connect. I tried the sheriff's office in town. Busy signal, continuous. The kind that means every line is occupied or no one's answering. I tried the neighbor 3 miles west. Bill Henderson, Vietnam vet with 2 German shepherds and a workshop full of tools we'd borrow back and forth. Bill answered on the 4th ring. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying or screaming or both. Marcus, that you? Yeah. You okay? No, I'm not. My daughter. He stopped. Breathed. She came home from Kansas City yesterday. Said she was feeling sick. Just a cold, she thought. This morning the line cut out. I tried calling back. Nothing. Just dead air. That was Friday, November 17th, 2:37 p.m. The last normal phone call I had with anyone. The snow started that night. Not unusual for November in Oklahoma. We get 1 or 2 surprise storms a season. But this was different. This was heavy, persistent, falling so thick you couldn't see 20 yards. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 2 hours. My weather radio said it was a freak system. Polar vortex dislocation. Cold air mass from Canada colliding with moisture from the Gulf. The timing felt apocalyptic. By Saturday morning, we had 9 inches on the ground and it was still falling. The power went out at 6:47 a.m. I know, because I was watching the clock on my microwave when it went dark. Generator kicked on automatically. I had diesel for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if I was careful. But something in my gut knew 3 weeks wouldn't be enough. I spent Saturday doing what preppers do, gathering information, making assessments, calculating odds. The hand crank radio was picking up emergency broadcasts, but they were fragmentary, contradictory. Some stations said the sickness was under control. Others said to barricade yourself inside. One station, I swear to God, was playing smooth jazz like nothing was wrong. Then I found a station out of Amarillo. The DJ was still there, still broadcasting, and he wasn't reading from a script anymore. He was just talking, voice shaking. If you're hearing this, it means you're still inside, still safe. Whatever you do, don't leave. They're everywhere now. Not dead, but not right either. They're moving slow because of the cold. But they're not stopping. They're not static. They're nothing. I tried other stations. Found a few still broadcasting. One in Wichita. One in Oklahoma City. Their messages were the same. Stay inside. Avoid contact. The infected were violent, unpredictable, degrading, mentally and physically, but still mobile, still dangerous. No one was saying the word zombie, but everyone was thinking it. Bill Henderson tried to leave Saturday afternoon. I watched through binoculars as his truck pulled out of his driveway, snow chains clanking, headlights cutting through the white. He made it, maybe half a mile before I lost sight of him. I never saw him come back. That night, I heard gunshots. 3 distinct pops from the direction of town, muffled by snow but unmistakable. Then silence. The snow kept falling. By Sunday morning, the roads were gone. Just white, unbroken white. And the power was still out. And my generator was chugging through diesel that wouldn't last. And my phone was fully charged but completely useless, because there was no signal, no network, no connection to anything. I made the decision at 10:15 a.m., Sunday, November 19th. I was going into the dugout. Not permanently, just as a fallback, a place to wait out whatever this was. Let the storm pass. Let help arrive. Let the authorities handle it. I'm laughing now, in my head, at that last thought. Let the authorities handle it. Like there were authorities left. Like there was anyone handling anything. I gave myself 2 hours to prepare. 2 hours to take everything I thought I might need and fit it into a space designed for 2 weeks, not indefinite shelter. The prepper in me was analytical, systematic. The human was terrified. I moved through my house like I was cataloging a museum. Every object had weight, literal and metaphorical. Take the extra blankets. They'll keep me warm, but they'll also trap moisture. Take more food. It won't fit, and I've already got 14 days calculated. Take the photo albums. They're heavy, useless for survival, but they're also the only proof that my life before this was real. I left the albums. took the blankets, took 3 extra gallons of water in collapsible containers, took my winter coat, even though the dugout was insulated enough I probably wouldn't need it, took my hunting knife, a hatchet, the ice axe I'd bought for a mountaineering trip I never took extra batteries, took a notebook and pens because I thought I might want to document this, might need to record what happened for whoever found me, took my father's watch, the one he wore in the Gulf War, even though it doesn't work anymore. The things we take when the world ends are never rational. I sealed the house at noon, locked every door, closed every blind, made it look empty and uninviting. The snow was still falling, already covering my tracks as fast as I made them. I dragged the last of my supplies to the storage shed, dropped the force floor and climbed down into the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately. The tunnel slanted down at a 30-degree angle. Just steep enough to be awkward, narrow enough I had to crouch. The walls were earth and timber, reinforced but not comfortable. Water was already seeping through in places, freezing into rivulets of ice. I reached the dugout at 12:40 p.m., pulled the last of my supplies down, climbed back up and sealed the entrance from inside, dropping the false floor back into place and securing it with the latch I'd installed. From above, it would just look like floorboards. From below, it was a locked door between me and everything else. I sat in the darkness for a long time after that, headlamp off, listening to my breathing, feeling the earth press in around me. This was supposed to be temporary. A few days, maybe a week. Wait for the storm to pass. Wait for the authorities. Wait for rescue. The radio worked. That was the first good sign. I cranked the handle until my arm ached, charged the battery enough to power on. Static, mostly, but I found a signal eventually, weak and wavering. Someone still broadcasting from somewhere. Day 7 of the outbreak. FEMA has issued a statement that rescue operations are ongoing, but weather conditions are hampering, asking residents to shelter in place and await. If you are experiencing symptoms, isolate immediately, and the signal cut out. I cranked the radio again, found a different station. This one was just a recording, looped endlessly. This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. All residents are advised to remain indoors. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Emergency services are not available. This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. I turned it off, saved the battery, sat in the dark, and did the math. 14 days of food, 5 gallons of water, plus whatever I could melt from snow if I was willing to risk exposing the ventilation shaft. Air circulation working, though the fan sounded strained already. Probably ice building up in the intake. Temperature in the dugout was maybe 45 degrees. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Not yet. Hour 1 in the dugout. Everything was fine. Hour 3. The silence was suffocating. Hour 6. I heard something moving above ground. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. Humans don't move like that. Slow, dragging, purposeless. But it wasn't an animal either. Animals move with intention, with direction. This was just wandering. Aimless. Like something that remembered motion but forgot why motion mattered. I turned off my headlamp, sought in absolute darkness, listened to the scraping sounds above me. The irregular rhythm that would pause for long moments, then resume. Scrape. Drag. Pause. Scrape. It moved away, eventually. I didn't turn my light back on for an hour. The first night in the dugout, I didn't sleep. I lay on the sleeping platform I'd built, wrapped in blankets that smelled like basement mildew, and listened to the world above. Wind howling, snow falling, and underneath those natural sounds, other sounds. Movement, scraping, once something that might have been screaming so distant and distorted I couldn't be sure it was real. I'd been underground for 11 hours. I had 13 days and 13 hours of supplies left. The math was comforting. Definite. If I could survive 2 weeks, surely the worst would be over by then. Surely rescue would come. Surely someone, somewhere was handling this. I started marking time obsessively, because time was the only thing I could control. I drew a calendar in my notebook. 14 boxes for 14 days. Each day would get an X when it was done. A countdown to safety. A promise that this was temporary. Day 1, hour 12. My hand was shaking too hard to draw the first X. The air circulation system failed on day 2. I woke up, if you could call it waking, when you haven't really slept to the sound of the fan struggling. Not the steady hum I designed it to make, but a grinding, labored whine that meant something was wrong. I clicked on my headlamp and checked the control box. The solar panel wasn't charging. The battery was drawing down stored power, running the fan on reserves. I cranked the hand radio and listened for weather updates. Found one, eventually. The storm was expected to continue for 3 more days. Snow accumulation between 18 and 24 inches. High winds. Dangerous cold. The solar panel was buried. The intake shaft was probably blocked with snow. The exhaust was likely frozen over. I'd designed the system for normal conditions, for a dugout that would only be occupied for a few days, during a tornado or a wildfire. I hadn't designed it for continuous occupation in a blizzard. The fan died at 9 a.m., day 2. The silence after it stopped was profound. I hadn't realized how much noise it made. How much that noise represented circulating air, moving air, fresh air from above instead of stale air from below. Without it, the dugout became what it really was, a hole in the ground, sealed, isolated, slowly consuming its own oxygen. I had 2 choices. I could try to clear the ventilation shaft, which meant going above ground, exposing myself to whatever was up there, and to the killing cold of the blizzard. Or I could stay down here and manage my air supply carefully, breathing shallow, minimizing movement, turning myself into a hibernating animal. I chose hibernation. The math was simple, but brutal. The dugout was roughly 8 by 12 by 6 feet high. That's 576 cubic feet of space. Approximately 16,300 liters of air. Humans breathe about 8 liters per minute at rest. More when active. That meant in perfect conditions. With no air exchange, I had maybe 50 hours of oxygen before carbon dioxide buildup would become dangerous. But I had water. Not much, but some. I had food. I had light. What I didn't have was fresh air. And fresh air was suddenly the most valuable resource in the world. I started breathing exercises immediately. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Slow, controlled, minimizing oxygen consumption. I lay perfectly still on my sleeping platform, moving only when absolutely necessary. No pacing, no unnecessary activity. Just breathing, counting, existing at the absolute minimum level required to stay alive. The condensation started forming around hour 18. Moisture from my breath freezing on the walls, creating a thin layer of frost that glittered in my headlamp beam. Beautiful. Deadly. Because moisture meant I was using the air, changing it, filling it with carbon dioxide that had nowhere to go. The radio became my lifeline. Not for information. The broadcasts were sporadic now, often just recordings, but for the illusion of connection. I would crank the handle slowly, conserving my energy, and listen to whatever I could find. Music stations still playing automated playlists. Emergency broadcasts repeating the same instructions. Once, someone's ham radio transmission. Breathless and terrified. They're not stopping. Doesn't matter how cold it gets. They just keep moving, slower but not stopping. We barricaded the doors, but they're just standing outside waiting and static. I turned it off. The news wasn't helping. Knowing what was happening out there only made the air in here feel thinner. Day 2 became day 3. I marked the X in my notebook, hand shaking less now, more numb than afraid. 11 days left. The calculation had changed, though. 11 days of food, yes. But how many days of air? I started noticing symptoms around hour 25. Headache. Mild but persistent. Difficulty focusing. A tingling in my fingers that might have been low oxygen, or might have been the cold, or might have been panic wearing a different face. I checked my first aid kit for anything that might help. Found aspirin. Took 2. They didn't help. Day 3, hour 30, I heard them for the first time. Not just one like before, but several. Multiple sets of feet dragging through snow above my head, moving in no particular direction, just wandering. I lay perfectly still, breathing as quietly as possible, as if they could somehow hear me through 12 feet of earth and snow. They couldn't. Logically, I knew they couldn't. But logic and 12 feet underground are not friends. One of them stopped directly above the ventilation shaft. I could hear it, standing there, probably drawn by the slight heat exhaust that was still escaping even though the fan was dead. Just standing. Waiting. For what? Did they still understand waiting? Did they understand anything? It moved on eventually. They all did. But the knowledge that they were up there, that they were close, that the only thing between me and them was earth and snow and the structural integrity of a dugout I'd built myself without professional help. That knowledge made the air feel even thinner. The radio picked up something different on day 3 night. Not a broadcast, but a transmission. Someone with a ham radio setup, calling out, "This is anyone, this is everyone. If you can hear this, respond. Please. I'm in what used to be Norman, Oklahoma. There are 4 of us left. We have food for maybe a week. No heat, no power. The infected are everywhere, moving slow but never stopping. And I don't think the cold is going to kill them. I don't think anything is going to kill them. If you can hear this, if anyone can hear this, respond. Please. I'm on frequency 14.3, 13 megahertz. Please." I cranked the radio's handle, pulled up the frequency. My hand hovered over the transmit button. I could respond. I could tell him I was here, that I was alive, that he wasn't alone. But what would that accomplish? I couldn't help him. He couldn't help me. All we could do was share our terror across the radio waves. And what good would that do? What purpose would that serve except to make both of us feel lonelier when the transmission ended? I didn't respond. I listened to him call out for 20 minutes, voice getting hoarser, more desperate, until finally he stopped. The frequency went silent. I never heard from him again. That was day 3, hour 36. I had 10 days and 12 hours of food left. The air was getting thicker, heavier, like breathing through wool. My headache was constant now. My fingers stayed numb. I was 12 feet underground, rationing oxygen, and for the first time since I descended into this hole, I allowed myself to think the thought I'd been avoiding. This isn't temporary. Rescue isn't coming. I'm not waiting out a storm. I'm buried alive, and the only question is whether I suffocate before I starve. I turned off my headlamp to conserve battery and lay in absolute darkness, counting breaths, feeling the earth press down from above. 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. The math was no longer comforting. By day 5, I was talking to myself, not intentionally. Not because I'd decided conversation would help maintain sanity, but because the silence had become a physical presence, something with weight and texture that pressed against my eardrums until I had to push back with sound. Any sound, even if it was just my own voice muttering nonsense into the dark. Oxygen, I heard myself say sometime during hour 90-something. Oxygen is O10. 2 oxygen atoms. Molecular weight approximately 32 grams per mole. Makes up about 21% of Earth's atmosphere at sea level. Less underground, much less underground, approximately none underground when you've been sealed in a hole for 5 days and counting. I laughed. The sound was ugly, foreign. When had I last laughed? Weeks ago. Months. My ex-wife used to complain. I never laughed at her jokes. "You're too serious," she'd say. Always calculating. Always preparing for the worst. She was right, of course. I was always calculating. But I'd calculated wrong. I'd calculated for tornadoes and wildfires and economic collapse. I'd never calculated for this. The slow suffocation of rational thought, the way your mind starts to unravel when there's no stimulation, no change, no difference between 1 hour and the next, except the gradual increase in carbon dioxide and the gradual decrease in hope. The hallucinations started sometime around day 6. I say hallucinations because that's the medical term, the rational explanation. But when you're 12 feet underground with air so thick it feels like drowning, rationality becomes negotiable. I saw my ex-wife standing in the corner of the dugout, arms crossed, expression disappointed. Not surprised. Disappointed. Like she'd known all along this is how I'd end up. "You built a grave," she said. Her voice was perfect, exactly as I remembered it. "You spent 2 summers digging your own grave, and you were so proud of it." "It's not a grave," I said, out loud to a hallucination. "It's a shelter, a fallback position. It's a coffin," she interrupted. "You just forgot to lie down." She disappeared. I blinked, and she was gone, and I was alone again with my headache and my numb fingers, and the ice crystals forming on the walls in patterns that looked almost like faces if you stared at them long enough. I stopped staring. The inventory became my meditation. I would count my supplies over and over, because counting was something to do, a way to impose order on chaos. 7 cans of soup, 6 cans of beans, 4 cans of tuna, 2 packages of crackers, stale but edible, 3 protein bars, 1 jar of peanut butter, 2 gallons of water remaining, plus maybe another gallon in snow I could melt if I risked the exposure. 9 days of food by my revised calculations. 9 days until I'd have to make a choice. Stay underground and starve, or surface and face whatever was up there. The cold was constant now. The dugout's insulation was failing. Or maybe it had never been adequate, and I was only now noticing because my body was running low on calories to burn for heat. I wore every piece of clothing I'd brought down. 2 pairs of socks, thermal underwear, jeans, 2 shirts, my winter coat, a beanie, gloves. I looked like a parody of a homeless person, bundled and shivering in a hole in the ground. I started recording messages. I don't know why. Maybe because talking to myself wasn't enough anymore. Maybe because I needed to believe someone would find these recordings, that my death would at least have a witness. I used my phone. Voice memo app. Battery at 40%. I spoke into the darkness, and the phone captured my words and stored them in digital memory that would probably never be accessed. November 24th. Day 6. Marcus Webb recording. Air quality deteriorating. Cognitive function impaired. Having trouble maintaining focus. Saw something that wasn't there. Several somethings. I think the CO2 buildup is causing hallucinations. Or maybe it's just isolation. Hard to tell the difference. Pause. Breathing. The recording captured that 2 labored, shallow breaths of a man drowning in air. If someone finds this, if anyone finds this, I want you to know I tried. I prepared. I did everything right, according to my calculations. But my calculations didn't account for this. Didn't account for the snow not stopping, the power grid failing, the infected not dying when they should. Didn't account for the world ending in November instead of summer when the solar panels would actually work. Pause. Longer this time. I want you to know I was scared. That feels important. That feels like something worth recording. I'm scared. I've been scared since I came down here. Before that, even. Scared since the first emergency alert. Scared since Marcy Peterson mentioned Minneapolis and tried to pretend it was just another flu season. I'm scared, and I'm alone. And I think I might die down here. I stopped recording. Saved the file. Started another one immediately. Because I wasn't done, wasn't finished. Had more to say to the hypothetical future person who would never hear this. The thing about being a prepper is you spend so much time imagining disaster that when it finally comes, you think you're ready. You think you've visualized every scenario, planned for every contingency. But you haven't. You can't, because the reality of disaster isn't the big dramatic moments you imagined. It's not the gunfights or the heroic last stands or the clever use of survival skills to overcome impossible odds. It's this. It's sitting in a hole you dug yourself, breathing your own carbon dioxide, hallucinating your ex-wife, counting cans of soup like they're gold bars. It's boring. Disaster is boring and terrifying, and so much lonelier than you ever imagined. I stopped recording again. Battery at 38% now. I was using power to record messages no one would hear, and that seemed appropriate somehow. Wasteful but appropriate. Day 7. Hour unknown. I'd stopped tracking precisely because time had lost meaning. I marked another X in my notebook. 7 days, 1 week, halfway through my theoretical 2-week supply, but the math was wrong now. All my math was wrong. I had food for 8 more days, maybe. I had water for 5 days if I was careful. I had air for how long? Hours, days. How did you calculate the exact moment when carbon dioxide poisoning would transition from uncomfortable to deadly? I cranked the radio. Found a signal weak and distant. Someone was still broadcasting, though I couldn't tell from where. Day 12 since Outbreak began. Reports indicate the infected population has reached critical mass in all major urban centers. Military operations have been suspended. FEMA relocation camps are at capacity and no longer accepting refugees. Citizens are advised to remain in shelter. Do not attempt to reach designated safe zones. Repeat, do not attempt to reach safe zones. They are no longer operational. The signal cut out. I didn't try to find it again. 8 days of food. 5 days of water. Unknown amount of air. Unknown. 0 chance of rescue. I lay on my sleeping platform and stared at the ceiling, at the ice crystals and the timber supports, and the polysheeting that was supposed to keep moisture out, but was instead keeping me in. The dugout felt smaller than it had on day 1. Not physically smaller, but psychologically. Like the walls were closing in 1 inch per day, slow enough you didn't notice until suddenly you couldn't extend your arms fully, couldn't stand without hitting your head, couldn't breathe without feeling the earth pressing down on your chest. "I'm going to die down here," I said out loud. To myself, to the darkness, to anyone who might be listening. I'm going to die, and no one will know, and in 100 years, someone will dig this up and find a skeleton in a sleeping bag, surrounded by empty soup cans, and they'll wonder why I didn't leave. The answer, of course, was fear. I didn't leave, because I was more afraid of what was up there than what was down here. Because suffocation felt safer than infection. Because dying alone in a hole felt more dignified than dying alone in the snow. Torn apart by things that used to be human, fear makes cowards of us all. And I was so scared. Day 8. I heard scraping above the dugout again. Multiple sources this time like before. But closer, more insistent. They were digging, not aimlessly wandering, but actually digging, clawing at frozen earth and snow, methodical and patient and inevitable. I grabbed the ice axe, held it across my chest, waited. The scraping continued for hours, then stopped, then started again. A rhythm. Dig, pause. Dig, pause. Like they'd learned, somehow, that efforts needed rest, that even their degraded bodies couldn't sustain continuous motion without pause. But they didn't stop. They rested, then resumed. Rested, then resumed. And each time they resumed, they were slightly closer. I could hear the earth shifting. Small avalanches of frozen dirt pattering down from the ceiling. Ice crystals falling like snow. I didn't record a message that day. Didn't mark an X in my notebook. Didn't do anything except lie in the dark, holding the ice axe, waiting for the ceiling to cave in and the infected to pour through like water through a broken dam. The ceiling held, but I knew, with the certainty of mathematical fact, that it wouldn't hold forever. The hand came through on day 9, hour unknown. I'd been drifting. Not sleeping. My body had forgotten how to sleep, but drifting in that gray space between consciousness and unconsciousness, where time stops having meaning, and you're not sure if you're thinking or dreaming. The sound snapped me back. A crack sharp and final, like a branch breaking under weight. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above my head had a fracture, 6 inches long, running along one of the timber supports. As I watched, dirt began trickling down. Not a lot, just a thin stream like sand through an hourglass. Then a finger. Not metaphorically, not a figure of speech. An actual human finger, pale and frozen, pushed through the crack in the ceiling. It moved slowly, exploratory, like a worm emerging from soil. The nail was black, either from frostbite or necrosis. The skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like it had been submerged in water too long. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as the finger withdrew, pulled back through the crack, leaving a hole maybe 2 inches wide. Dirt continued falling. Then the finger returned, joined by another, and they began to widen the hole. Methodical, patient, inhuman in their persistence. The scraping sounds intensified. Multiple locations now. Above my head, to the left near the ventilation shaft, somewhere near the entrance tunnel. They'd found weak points. They were exploiting them. Whatever intelligence remained in their infected brains had retained the understanding that barriers could be broken if you applied pressure in the right places. I rolled off the sleeping platform, ice axe in hand, and pressed myself against the far wall. My breath came in short gasps, partly fear, partly the thickening air. The carbon dioxide was building to dangerous levels now. I could feel it in the sluggishness of my thoughts, the way my vision tunneled at the edges, the persistent ringing in my ears. The hole in the ceiling widened. 3 fingers now, then 4, then an entire hand. It pushed through, groping blindly, finding nothing. The hand was male. I thought, though, it was hard to tell with the degradation. Wedding ring still on the finger. I wondered who he'd been before. Someone's husband. Someone's father, maybe. Someone who'd woken up one morning not knowing it would be his last day as himself. The hand withdrew. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope they'd give up. Move on, find easier prey elsewhere. Then, an eye appeared in the hole. I've seen horror movies. I've read survival guides and medical textbooks and after-action reports from disaster zones. I thought I understood what horror looked like, what the human body could become when disease and death stripped away civilization's veneer. I understood nothing. The eye was clouded, the white yellowed like old paper, the iris a washed-out blue that might have been vibrant once. But it was the intelligence in that eye, or the absence of it, that made my stomach turn. It wasn't vacant, exactly. Wasn't empty. There was something there. Something looking, processing, understanding on a level that transcended language or conscious thought. It saw me. The eye blinked, slowly, deliberately, then disappeared, and the scraping intensified tenfold. They knew I was here now. knew exactly where I was. The aimless wandering was over. This was targeted. This was a hunt. I had seconds to decide. Stay here and fight them in a confined space where I'd be overwhelmed in minutes. Or move. But move where? The dugout was 8 by 12 feet. There was nowhere to go except the entrance tunnel, and that led up, toward the surface, up toward all of them. The timber support cracked. A sound like a gunshot, sharp and final. The ceiling sagged, bowed under the weight of earth and snow and bodies pressing down from above. More dirt fell, a cascade now. And with it came smell rote and cold and something chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with spoiled meat. I made the decision my body had already made for me. I ran, not toward the entrance, toward the ventilation shaft. It was a desperate, stupid plan, but desperation had become my planning methodology. The ventilation shaft was 18 inches in diameter, running up at a 60-degree angle for 12 feet before emerging 50 yards from the dugout entrance. It was never meant to be an escape route. It was meant for air circulation, for a small solar panel and a fan that had failed days ago. But it was narrow. They couldn't follow. Or they could, but slowly, one at a time, crawling. And slow meant I could fight them. One at a time meant survivable odds. The ceiling collapsed as I reached the shaft. Not completely. The dugout didn't implode in a single catastrophic failure, but a section maybe 3 feet across gave way. And with it came hands, arms, a head pushing through, snow and frozen dirt avalanching down. I caught a glimpse of the face, male, middle-aged, cheekbone exposed where the skin had sloughed off, mouth working soundlessly like a fish out of water. I swung the ice axe, felt it connect with skull, felt the resistance, then the give. The infected thing didn't scream or cry out, just stopped moving for a moment, then resumed, undeterred by the hole I just put in its head. I swung again, aimed lower for the neck. Soft tissue. The axe buried itself deep, and this time the thing stopped, went limp, slid back through the hole it had made, pulled by gravity and by the weight of others pressing in from behind. I didn't wait to see if it would get back up. I grabbed the edge of the ventilation shaft and pulled myself in. The shaft was tight, claustrophobically tight. I had to exhale completely just to fit my shoulders through the opening. The walls were PVC pipe I'd installed myself, smooth but not smooth enough. My coat snagged on seams, my backpack caught on protrusions. Behind me, I heard more of the ceiling collapsing. Heard the dugout filling with earth and snow and bodies. I pushed upward, used my elbows and knees in a climbing technique I'd learned from a YouTube video years ago and never thought I'd need. Each foot of progress felt like a mile. The shaft was angled but not vertical. I couldn't climb, could only worm my way up, inch by agonizing inch. My headlamp illuminated maybe 3 feet ahead. The shaft continued beyond that, a tunnel of white PVC disappearing into darkness. I could see ice on the walls, thick accumulations where condensation had frozen. In places, the ice had narrowed the shaft to barely 16 inches. I had to exhale, compress my chest, force my way through gaps that threatened to trap me like an insect in amber. Behind me, scraping, they'd found the shaft entrance, were following. I pushed harder. My lungs were screaming. The air in the shaft was even worse than the dugout, stale and dead and full of my own expelled carbon dioxide. Each breath felt like drowning. My vision swam. The ringing in my ears crescendoed to a shriek. I was going to pass out. Going to black out and slide back down into the shaft and into their hands, and that would be the end, unconscious and helpless, and torn apart by things that used to be human. My hand broke through snow, fresh air. Cold, burning, beautiful fresh air rushed into the shaft, into my face, into my lungs that had forgotten what oxygen tasted like. I gasped, choked, gasped again, clawed at the snow blocking the shaft exit. My fingers were numb, useless, but I kept clawing, kept pushing. Kept fighting until my head emerged into daylight so bright it hurt. I pulled myself out of the shaft like being born, gasping and blind and covered in dirt and ice. Collapsed into snow that was thigh-deep, maybe deeper. The storm was still raging. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The wind was a physical force, pushing me, trying to shove me back down into the hole I'd just escaped. But I was out. I was alive. I was breathing air that wasn't poisoned with my own exhalations. I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds to appreciate this. Then I heard the scraping behind me from the shaft and remembered that escape wasn't the same as survival. I looked back, could just barely see the shaft opening, a small hole in the snow partially obscured by the storm. Something was in there, moving, climbing, slower than I had. They didn't understand leverage or technique or desperation, but climbing nonetheless. I stood. My legs barely supported my weight. 9 days underground had atrophied muscles I didn't know I had. The world tilted, spun, threatened to dump me back into the snow. I braced against the wind, forced my legs to work, took one step, then another. The dugout was behind me. I could see the storage shed maybe 30 yards away, a dark shape in the white. My house beyond that. The road, if there still was a road under all this snow. Beyond that, and everywhere movement. Shapes in the storm. Figures that might have been trees or fence posts or people, standing motionless in the killing wind, waiting. I had the ice axe. I had a hunting knife on my belt. I had frostbite starting in my fingers and toes. I had maybe 3 hours of daylight left, though with the storm it was hard to tell. I had no food, no water, no shelter, except what I could reach before hypothermia shut my body down. The thing emerged from the ventilation shaft behind me. Female, I thought, though it was hard to tell. It pulled itself free of the opening, stood in the snow, swayed like a drunk, its head turned, scanning, searching, found me. We looked at each other across 30 feet of storm and snow. I don't know what it saw. A living human, probably. Heat and movement and prey. I saw what I might become if I failed. If the cold didn't kill me first, if infection found me. A thing that moved but didn't live, that breathed but didn't think, that existed in some liminal space between life and death. It took a step toward me, slow dragging the same irregular gait I'd heard above the dugout for days. I ran. Running in thigh-deep snow is not running. It's drowning in slow motion. Each step required a full second of effort, lifting my leg high enough to clear the surface, pushing forward, forcing my boot through resistance that felt like concrete, planting, repeating. My thighs burned after 10 steps. After 20, I couldn't feel them at all. The infected thing followed. It was slower than I was, but not by much. And it didn't tire. Didn't need to conserve energy or calculate sustainable pace or worry about heart rate and lactic acid buildup. It just moved implacable as erosion, and I had maybe 100-yard head start that was shrinking with every second. I aimed for the storage shed. It was closer than the house, and close mattered more than anything. My lungs were raw, each breath like inhaling glass. 9 days of oxygen deprivation had left me weak, compromised, operating at maybe 60% capacity. The infected thing was operating at 90%, maybe more. Whatever the disease did, it seemed to override pain, override fatigue, override the body's normal limitations. 50 yards to the shed. I risked a glance back. The thing was closer. 20 feet, maybe. Close enough I could hear it breathing. Wet. Rattling sounds like fluid in the lungs. Behind it, other shapes in the storm. Hard to tell how many. 5, 10, more. 30 yards to the shed. My vision was tunneling again. Edges going black. Not carbon dioxide this time. Oxygen debt. My body demanding more than my lungs could provide after 9 days of shallow breathing. The thing lunged, not fast, not coordinated, but fast enough. I felt fingers brush my backpack, snag on a strap. I twisted, swung the ice axe blindly behind me. Felt it connect with something. The grip on my backpack released. 20 yards. I wasn't going to make it. The math was clear. I had maybe 10 seconds before the thing caught me. Before others joined it. Before I went down under weight and teeth and nails, and never got back up. 10 yards. I reached the shed. No time to open the door properly. I hit it with my shoulder, felt it give. Burst through into darkness, spun, saw the thing 3 steps behind me, slammed the door, dropped the crossbar into place just as something heavy hit the other side. The door shook, held. For now, I collapsed against a wall, gasping, my lungs burning with each breath. The shed was dark, windowless. barely warmer than outside. My tools lined the walls. Saws, hammers, a workbench I'd built from reclaimed lumber. The false floor that led to the dugout entrance was in the corner, though I had no intention of going back down there. Not ever. The pounding on the door continued, rhythmic, patient. I could hear others joining. Multiple fists, multiple bodies, throwing themselves against wood and hinges designed to keep out wind and rain. Not sustained assault. The door would hold for a while. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. And then what? I forced myself to think. Forced my oxygen-starved brain to function. To plan. To calculate survival odds. I was trapped in a shed surrounded by infected. The storm showed no signs of stopping. My house was another 50 yards away. I could see it through gaps in the shed's walls. A dark shape in the white. Windows shattered. Door hanging open. Something had already gotten inside. My house wasn't sanctuary anymore. So, stay here and wait for the door to fail, or leave now when I still had the element of surprise. Neither option was good. Both led to probable death. But one at least involved motion, agency, the illusion of control over my fate. I stood. Checked my supplies. Ice axe. Check. Hunting knife. Check. Headlamp battery at 12%. Check. My backpack with 9 days of accumulated essentials. Half a protein bar. 1 bottle of water frozen solid. A lighter. My father's broken watch. My phone at 17% battery, containing voice memos no one would hear. Pathetic. My entire survival kit was pathetic. 9 days of preparation underground, and I'd emerged with less than I'd gone down with. I looked around the shed for anything useful. Found a hatchet, smaller than the ice axe but easier to swing in confined spaces. Found a coil of rope. Why, I don't know. Rope just seemed like something you should have in a survival situation. Found a roll of duct tape, because duct tape fixes everything except the end of the world. Then I found the thing I'd forgotten I had. A flare gun. I'd bought it years ago for backcountry emergencies. Kept it in the shed with my camping gear. Forgotten about it until this moment. I opened the case with shaking hands. The gun was there still, functional. 2 flares in the case. I checked the expiration date. 3 years passed, but flares don't really expire. They just become less reliable. Unreliable was better than nothing. I loaded a flare. Pointed it at the shed ceiling, finger on the trigger, and allowed myself to imagine what would happen. The flare would punch through the roof, shoot up into the storm sky, burn bright red for 30 seconds while I ran. Would anyone see it? Would anyone care? Would there be anyone left to respond to distress signals? No, probably not. But the flare would create light, confusion, maybe draw the infected away from the shed entrance for crucial seconds while I made my escape. It was a terrible plan, but terrible plans were all I had left. The pounding on the door intensified. The crossbar was beginning to crack. I could see splinters forming, wood fibers separating under sustained pressure. Minutes left, maybe. Maybe less. I moved to the back wall of the shed. There was no door here, no window, just wooden planks nailed to a frame. I'd built this shed myself. I knew its weak points. I positioned myself, raised my leg, and kicked. The plank cracked. I kicked again. It splintered, came partially free. 2 more kicks, and there was a gap large enough to squeeze through. Behind me, the front door's crossbar snapped. I pulled the flare gun's trigger. The flare shot upward, punched through the shed's tin roof in an explosion of sparks and sound. Bright red light flooded the interior, casting wild shadows. I heard confused sounds from outside. The pounding stopped, replaced by shuffling as the infected reoriented toward the sudden light source. I squeezed through the gap in the back wall, emerged into snow and storm and wind that tried to push me back inside. The flare was above me, falling now in a lazy arc, bright enough to see by even in the storm. Bright enough to see the shapes converging on the shed from all directions. I counted 7. Maybe 8. Hard to tell in the storm. But definitely more than I could fight. More than I could run from for very long. The house was out. The road was death. Miles of open terrain with no cover. The woods were to the north, maybe 200 yards of running through deep snow, but woods meant shelter, concealment, the possibility of losing pursuit in terrain that favored humans over shambling infected. 200 yards might as well have been 200 miles. The flare hit the ground, still burning. The infected were silhouetted against its light, dark figures moving with that distinctive irregular gait. One of them, the female from the ventilation shaft, had reached the shed's front door. Others were circling, searching for entry points. I had seconds, maybe 10, maybe less. I looked north toward the woods, looked at my hands, already numb despite the gloves, looked at my legs, shaking with exhaustion and oxygen debt. Did the math one more time. 200 yards, deep snow, compromised physical condition, multiple pursuers who didn't feel cold or pain or fatigue. The math said I would die, but I would die anyway. The only question was here and now or there and later meant hope, however irrational, however small. I chose later. I ran north, toward the woods, toward darkness, toward whatever survival looked like when all your calculations failed, and all you had left was momentum and the animal refusal to lie down and die. The first 50 yards were adrenaline. Pure chemical override of a body that should have collapsed 10 minutes ago. My legs moved like pistons, mechanical, unfeeling. The snow was deeper here. I'd left the somewhat packed area around my buildings and was now in virgin territory where drifts had accumulated for 9 days without interruption. Each step sank me to mid-thigh. Some steps, waist deep. I fell 3 times in those first 50 yards. Each time I forced myself up, forced myself forward, because stopping meant dying, and some primitive part of my brain insisted that dying was unacceptable. Behind me, pursuit. I didn't look back. Looking back meant seeing how close they were, and seeing meant calculating. And calculating meant understanding that the numbers didn't work, would never work, and understanding would lead to despair, and despair to surrender. So I didn't look. I just moved. The flare's light was fading now, the red glow dimming behind me. The storm was intensifying. Wind gusts, strong enough to stagger me, snow falling so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The woods were somewhere in that white void. I had to trust my sense of direction, had to believe that north was still north, that the trees I couldn't see were still there waiting. 75 yards. My adrenaline was crashing. Reality was reasserting itself in the form of burning lungs and screaming muscles and a heart rate that felt dangerously high. I was going to have a heart attack, going to collapse from cardiac arrest in the middle of a snowfield and die before the infected even reached me. But I didn't. My heart kept beating, too stubborn or too stupid to quit. 100 yards. The sounds of pursuit were distant now, muffled by snow and wind. I risked a glance back. Saw shapes in the storm, maybe 3 or 4 of them, trailing me by 30 yards or more. They were slower in the deep snow. Their degraded motor control made navigation difficult, made each step a process instead of an instinct. I was winning. Slowly, agonizingly, I was pulling ahead. 125 yards. My foot hit something solid under the snow. A fallen branch, thick and gnarled. I stumbled, caught myself, looked up. Trees. Dark vertical shapes emerging from white, close enough to touch. I'd reached the woods. I'd plunged into the tree line and immediately the storm weakened. The canopy, even stripped bare by winter, provided some shelter from the wind. The snow was shallower here, only knee-deep instead of waist-deep. I could move faster, could breathe easier. I allowed myself 5 seconds to rest. Braced against a pine tree, gasping, checking my pursuers. I could see them at the edge of the woods now. 4 of them, moving with that patient, inexorable shuffle. They'd reach the tree line in maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes to decide. Keep running until I collapsed or make a stand with weapons and terrain advantage. I looked at my hands. The ice axe felt heavy, foreign. My fingers were so numb I wasn't sure I could grip it properly in a fight. The hatchet was lighter, easier, but it meant letting them get close. Very close. I looked at the trees. Thick enough to slow them down. Numerous enough to break line of sight. If I kept moving, stayed quiet, I might be able to lose them in the woods, might be able to wait them out, let them wander off in search of easier prey. Might die of hypothermia while I waited. The math kept changing. Every calculation I made was obsolete before I finished it. So I stopped calculating, started acting, started trusting instinct over spreadsheets. I moved deeper into the woods, moved quietly now, conserving energy, placing each foot carefully to minimize noise. The infected were trackers I'd learned. They followed sound, motion, heat. If I could minimize all 3, I might become invisible. Behind me, the first of them reached the tree line. I watched from 50 feet away, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees. It was male, I thought, wearing the remains of a plaid jacket. No shoes. Its feet were black with frostbite, toes probably dead, but it kept walking anyway. It paused at the edge of the woods, head turning slowly, scanning, looking for me. I held perfectly still, breathed through my nose, shallow and quiet, watched as it took a step into the woods. Then another, moving in approximately my direction, but not precisely. It had lost my trail. The second infected arrived. Female, older, wearing what might have once been a nurse's scrubs. She moved past the first one, heading on a different vector. Not coordinating, they didn't communicate, didn't cooperate, just hunted independently in the same general area. Third infected. Fourth, all of them spreading out through the woods like a search pattern, random but thorough. I waited until they'd passed, until they were 20 yards ahead of me, still moving forward while I stayed hidden. Then I moved laterally, perpendicular to their search direction. Slow, careful steps. No running. Running meant noise, and noise meant attention, and attention meant death. I moved like this for maybe 10 minutes, sidestepping through the woods, circling back toward my property, but staying within the tree line, keeping trees between me and them. Occasionally I'd see one, a dark shape, moving through white. I'd freeze, wait for it to pass, resume. It was working. I was losing them. Then I heard the crack. Not a branch breaking under my weight. I'd been careful, so careful. But behind me, above me, the sound of wood under stress, the groan of something giving way. I looked up in time to see the snow slide. A massive accumulation that had built up on pine branches. 9 days of continuous snowfall, creating a dense, heavy mass. The tree couldn't hold it anymore. The branches couldn't bear the weight. It all came down at once. I tried to move, tried to dodge, but there was nowhere to go. The snow hit me like an avalanche, buried me, drove me to the ground under hundreds of pounds of frozen weight. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't see. Just white pressure, crushing, suffocating. I clawed upward, found air, gasped. My headlamp was gone, knocked off in the fall. My ice axe was somewhere under the snow. The hatchet was still on my belt somehow. I grabbed it, used it to pull myself free of the snow, emerged like a swimmer breaking the surface, and froze. 10 feet away, one of the infected stood watching me. The male in the plaid jacket. It had heard the noise, had come to investigate, had found me exactly where I tried not to be. Exposed, vulnerable, half buried in snow. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity. I could see its face clearly now. Mid-40s, maybe. Beard, or what was left of one. One eye was clouded, the other relatively clear. That clear eye looked at me with something I couldn't name. Not hunger, not hate, just recognition, acknowledgement. An understanding that we were predator and prey, and biology had assigned our roles, and now those roles would play out to their inevitable conclusion. It took a step toward me. I pulled the hatchet free of my belt. My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped it. I forced my fingers to close, to grip, to hold the weapon that might be the only thing between me and infection. It took another step. I stood. The snow around me was chest deep from the fall. I couldn't run, could barely move. This was the stand I'd been avoiding, the fight I'd been running from. The moment when all my preparation and planning came down to me and a hatchet, and a thing that used to be human. It lunged. I swung. The hatchet caught it in the shoulder, bit deep, stuck. I tried to pull it free, but the blade was wedged in bone or cartilage or frozen muscle. The thing didn't stop. Didn't seem to notice it had a hatchet embedded in its body. Just kept coming, reaching for me with arms that were stronger than they should be, hands that were clawed and grasping. I let go of the hatchet, grabbed the hunting knife from my belt. Shorter blade, meant for cleaning game, not fighting. It would have to be enough. The thing's hands found my coat, gripped, pulled me close. I could smell it now, rotten cold and something chemical. Could see its mouth working, teeth clicking together, trying to bite but missing because I was thrashing, fighting, refusing to make it easy. I stabbed upward, felt the knife sink into soft tissue under the jaw, punched through into the skull. The thing stopped, went limp. I pushed it away, watched it fall into the snow. My knife still buried in its head. I collapsed, sat in the snow, gasping, shaking. I'd done it. I'd killed one. I was alive. Then I heard the others. They'd heard the struggle. Were coming. Multiple shapes moving through the trees, converging on my location, drawn by noise and motion and the scent of blood, mine or the dead things. I couldn't tell. I pulled my knife free from the skull, looked around for the hatchet, but couldn't find it in the snow. The ice axe was gone. I had a knife, legs that barely worked, and lungs that felt full of glass. The math said I was done, said this was where the story ended. Marcus Webb, Doomsday Prepper, dead in the woods behind his property, killed not by lack of preparation, but by preparing for the wrong disaster. But then I saw it, 20 yards to my left, barely visible through the trees, a shape that wasn't natural, man-made, rectangular, dark metal. Bill Henderson's storage container. I'd forgotten about it. Bill had bought its surplus years ago. One of those 20-foot shipping containers. Converted it into a workshop/storage for tools and equipment he couldn't fit in his barn. It sat on his property line, right at the edge of the woods. I'd helped him position it back when Bill was alive and the world made sense. It had a door, a lock, walls that were solid steel. The infected were maybe 15 seconds away. I could hear them, see their shapes materializing from the white. I ran. Not fast. I was beyond fast, but with purpose, with direction, with the last reserves of energy my body could provide. 15 yards. 10. The container was real, was solid, was possible salvation or possible tomb, depending on what I found inside. 5 yards. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, locked. Of course it was locked. Bill wasn't stupid. He'd secured his valuables. The infected were right behind me. I could hear their breathing, that wet, rattling sound. I swung my knife at the padlock. Once, twice. The blade skittered off metal. On the third swing, the lock broke. Not because I'd cut through it. I didn't have the strength. But because it was cheap. Corroded, weakened by 9 days of snow and ice. I yanked the door open. Plunged inside. Spun. Saw an infected thing right behind me, reaching fingers inches from my face. I slammed the door shut, dropped the internal latch, backed away as something heavy hit the door from outside. Darkness. Complete and absolute. My headlamp was gone. My phone was at single-digit battery. I fumbled for the flashlight function. Found it. Clicked it on. The container was full of tools, equipment, shelving units. A workbench. A space heater that wouldn't work without power. Cans of paint and varnish. A rifle mounted on the wall. A rifle. I grabbed it. Checked the chamber. Empty. Looked around frantically for ammunition. Found it in a lockbox under the workbench. The lockbox was secured, but the key was right there. Magnetic strips stuck to the container wall because Bill believed in accessibility in emergencies. I loaded the rifle. 5 rounds in the magazine. 5 chances to survive. The pounding on the door continued. I could hear multiple bodies now, throwing themselves against steel, patient and relentless. But steel was stronger than wood. Steel would hold. For a while, I sank to the floor. Rifle across my lap. Phone light dying. The container was maybe 40 degrees inside. Cold, but not killing cold. I could survive here. For a while. Until the infected lost interest, or I ran out of ammunition, or I simply died from exposure and exhaustion, and the accumulated trauma of 9 days underground, followed by a desperate escape that should have killed me 3 times over. The pounding continued. I listened to it, rhythmic and hypnotic, and allowed myself a moment of irrational gratitude. I was alive. Against mathematics, against probability, against every reasonable expectation, I was still breathing. The dugout hadn't saved me. It had just made sure I was alive long enough to run. I don't know what day it is anymore. My phone died, maybe a week ago. Could be longer. Time is elastic when you're surviving minute by minute. The infected eventually wandered away from the container. Took them 3 days. 3 days of pounding, scratching, waiting. Then the sound stopped. I waited another 2 days. Before I risked opening the door, the storm had ended. The sky was clear. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, The snow was pristine, unmarked, except for the tracks of infected wandering through the woods with no destination, no purpose, just endless motion. I'd found supplies in Bill's container, not food. He hadn't stocked it for survival, but water purification tablets, a camping stove and fuel, thermal blankets, a proper winter parka that fit better than my coat, the rifle and 157 rounds of ammunition which felt like wealth beyond measure. Most importantly, I'd found a map. Topographical, covering 100 square miles, marking locations Bill had scouted for hunting. One location was circled in red. Prepper bunker, abandoned 12 miles, any eye, well stocked. Someone else's preparation. Someone else's miscalculation about when to retreat and when to stand ground. But their loss might be my survival. 12 miles northeast through infected territory with no idea if the bunker even still existed or if it was already occupied or picked clean. But 12 miles was distance, and distance was hope, and hope was the only currency that mattered. I left the container on what I think was day 17 since the outbreak began. Could be day 18. The exact number didn't matter anymore. I walked northeast, rifle slung over my shoulder, moving only during daylight, finding shelter each night in abandoned houses or cars or once, desperately in a grain silo that echoed with every breath. The infected were everywhere, but they were slower now. The cold was taking them finally. Not killing them. I don't think they could die in any conventional sense. But freezing them in place, turning them into statues that might thaw when spring came. I passed towns, empty, silent. Snow covering everything, erasing evidence of who these people had been. I saw bodies, frozen mid-stride, some infected and some not. It was impossible to tell the difference anymore. On day 21, or 22, or 23, I found the bunker. It was exactly where Bill's map said it would be. Underground, concealed beneath a false hillside, accessible only if you knew where to look. The entrance was locked, but I had ammunition, and locks don't withstand bullets. Inside, supplies for 2 years. Water filtration, food storage, a generator with fuel, solar panels, communications equipment, books, medicine. Everything someone had carefully stockpiled for a disaster they'd never survived to use. Their preparation became my salvation. I've been here for 6 days now. The bunker has a radio that works, and I've been broadcasting on every frequency I can find, calling out to anyone who might hear. I've gotten one response. A woman in Colorado. She's alone, too. We talk for an hour each evening, sharing information, sharing hope, sharing the burden of survival. There might be others. There might be communities reforming, survivors clustering together. Or there might just be us, scattered across a frozen continent, talking to each other through radio waves, while we wait to see if humanity will persist, or if we're just the epilogue to a story that's already ended. I think about the Dugout sometimes, About 12 feet of earth and timber that was supposed to save me. It didn't. It couldn't. It was designed for the wrong disaster, calculated for variables that didn't matter, but it kept me alive long enough to run, long enough to adapt, long enough to fail forward until failure looked like survival. That's what being a prepper really means, I've learned. Not preventing disaster. Not avoiding catastrophe. Just staying alive long enough to see what happens next. Just refusing to lie down when the math says you should. The woman in Colorado, Sarah, her name is Sarah, asked me yesterday if I thought we'd make it. Long term. If humans would survive this. I told her I didn't know. Told her my calculations had been wrong about everything else, so they'd probably be wrong about this too. But I also told her I was still broadcasting, still breathing, still counting days even though I'd lost track of the numbers. Still preparing for tomorrow, whatever tomorrow looks like. Because that's what survivors do. We keep going,